We have a motion by Vilhauer and a second by Lallam. And Heath, will you explain this to us, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of council. As you recall, we're currently in a design contract with HDR for the design services for the administration building out at the wastewater treatment facility. Through recent investigations, well, I guess to back up one step further, the plan initially was to also have to do some design work for some repairs to the primary clarifier number 2 out at the wastewater treatment plant. So in gearing up for that design work, while HDR was on site for the admin building design, they did a little bit of a brief investigation to that structure with wastewater staff and with the superintendent out there. What they found was it looks a little more concerning than the 2011 facility evaluation showed. And instead of doing design for repair work, what this contract would do is allow them to do a structural assessment of that primary clarifier and determine whether repairs are going to be sufficient or whether we need to do a lot more structural reconstruction of that part of the facility. So in lieu of a design contract for repairs, we're proposing an analysis of that primary clarifier to decide what's appropriate in the next steps to preserve its functionality at the wastewater treatment facility. And one of the simplest ways to do that was to amend the current contract for the design on the admin building, and that's why we brought this forth as a proposed amendment to that contract in the sum of just under $35,000.
All right, thank you. Questions or comments? Councilwoman Manty?
We're looking at some of the oldest parts or the oldest parts of the plant. Is that my understanding from what I was looking at, or older equipment?
Yeah, that's a great question, Councilwoman Manty. And Colin Paulson's here to participate in the discussion as well. Mike Berger could not make it this evening. I do not know the exact age of this part of the facility, but just given where we're at and the status of things, I would estimate this is probably one of the older parts of the facility that hasn't been touched in a while. I will reference back to the 2011 facility evaluation that was done. At that time, this primary clarifier appeared to only need some repairs, but now it's progressed to the point 8 years later that it looks like it's a lot more substantial than that. So I don't know, Colin, if you can speak to the exact age of that part of the facility or not.
I want to say the clarifier was built in the 60s. Maybe they.
No, I don't think so. I think the plant was new in 97 or 95. So
I guess I'm not sure. I thought Mike had told me at one point. I just forgot.
Well, maybe it was just the new part of it.
I just know that
Digesters.
Yeah, the metal is corroded to the point where you can actually see holes through the metal. And Mike described it as paper thin. It's not quite paper thin, but it is. It's not stable at this current rate, and this is necessary, especially when we're flooding, to have this clarifier up and running. They really struggle with their processes when this is down, and so they struggled this spring, and he's really worried about next year already.
Okay, yeah. Councilman Vilhar?
Okay, help me out. Or what is a clarifier? Clarify the clarifier.
It is one of the numerous phases of wastewater treatment, and the primary clarifier is one of the dome structures out there that has a sweeping arm that runs in a circular motion, and the concrete and the troughs and the metal, the mechanics that are involved in that are all showing their age and needing repair.
So the treatment, primary is the first stage of sewage treatment. Secondary would be a secondary stage. So primary is basically settling out and sending things in different directions. Other questions or comments? All right, we'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item number 5 is presentation of dangerous, vicious dog ordinance, and Councilwoman Beth Manty will be leading this discussion. So I'll just hand it over to you, Beth.
I'm going to go to the other side. this one? This one? Let me just practice. Okay. Got it. Okay, very good. Thank you for taking the time to do this. We realized that what we threw in front of you was a very ominous looking kind of amendment to the ordinance. A lot of it is just that it's struck through and underlined, and it's all red and new. And so we thought the best way to do this would be to just give a brief overview, highlight some of the points that might have questions for you, and then let any of the other Animal Control Board members talk about anything that they have concerns about. But basically, this is a overview in anticipation of the first reading, which will be next council meeting, and then the action would be the meeting after that. Am I correct? That's how we have it planned. So this gives you a lot of time to read through it, to digest it, maybe come up with some other questions, or hopefully I'll do a good enough job that you won't have any questions. So anyway, I'm going to have the members of the Animal Control Board that are here today introduce themselves, and our Animal Control Officer.
Chris Christensen. Mark Reed.
Okay, good. So let's go. This was a fairly complicated process. So we're looking to amend the ordinance, and this is also known as "my dog never bites," because that's what we hear all the time. Oh, my dog never bites. So that's what we decided to subtitle it. Anyway, so as you can see, briefly, the purpose and intent is to protect the public and protect other animals. And so that was the mission that we sent out to achieve. Matt was super instrumental in helping us get a lot of the legal aspects of it, making sure that we weren't going to break the law or violate citizens' rights, things like that. So our goal was to take a look at a section of the ordinance that probably hasn't been reviewed for 10 or more years. I'm thinking at least 10 years, so it was way overdue. Okay, so this was just a quote that we took from the National Animal Care and Control Association, that dangerous and vicious animals should be labeled by their actions and not because of their breed. A lot of times we hear about breed bans and things like that, and they say, oh, that'll solve all the problems. Well, it just makes things worse. It doesn't solve any problems at all. And so in South Dakota, it is illegal for any municipality to actually enact a breed ban ordinance. I kind of stuck that at the bottom there. Okay. All right, we went out fixing what was broken. That was exhausting. We used the model ordinances from Municipal Lawyer Journal, the Virginia state law that was referenced in the Veterinary Journal, and Rapid City had some ordinances that were also helpful to us. And Matt, if you ever want to kick in with any of the things that we've done with developing this, I would welcome that you guys would. Okay, so our objective, strengthening the ordinance. So we needed an ordinance. Let me just back up a little bit. Our current ordinance, the highest level of dog misbehavior is classified as a vicious dog. And within that, there is very little wiggle room for, I believe, and I think the rest of the Animal Control Board believes, for law enforcement and animal control to do their job. So I know that it was once said that leaving some of the dogs behind that they could not seize, that were dangerous, would be like leaving a weapon on the table, and so we've never had that ability before. So basically we wanted law enforcement, which includes, Chris and all the other law enforcement, to be able to remove that dog immediately. And then also this ordinance will clarify what that means. And then we wanted to make sure that our repeat offenders, which are many, were not able to continue to cause injury. So we've had a couple now that had they been removed in the first incident, they would not have been able to harm the child for a second time. Then we wanted to make sure that we protected pets and owners' rights. So if you look at the idea of an ordinance providing protection for domestic animals, we've never had that before. That has never been in our ordinances. So any dog who attacks or kills or maims another dog or another person's dog. You're walking your dog and a dog is on loose, running around, attacks your dog. There has been no recourse or remedy because our ordinances have always been related to people and dogs. And we felt that this was long overdue. We also really took our time to make sure that owners understood their rights and their appeal, so that they didn't feel like we were just going to walk around town, take away dogs, and that was it. So there's a lot of remedy available to dog owners throughout this entire process. So what is a dangerous dog? So a dangerous dog is essentially a dog category that we plugged in order to give us the opportunity to get those really vicious dogs. This is essentially the equivalent of what we have now as a vicious dog. So you can read that yourself, but these are more minor injuries, scratches and abrasions, maybe, we do include here killing a companion animal, but that is a different situation. We've even had situations where a little dog has taken on a big dog because dogs really don't realize how big they are and has lost by no fault of the other dog. So, and other times it's just been, but in each case, if no serious injury, occurred from any of these, then the dog is not a dangerous dog. So a vicious dog. This is a dog that has killed a person, inflicted serious injury to a person, continued to exhibit behaviors that resulted in a previous dangerous dog. I'm sure many of you have been around long enough to remember those 4 dogs that attacked that woman in the trailer park and severely, damaged her face and her arm and some of those kind of things, and she'll be having plastic surgery for the rest of her life. In that instance, we were unable to seize all of those dogs. We took some to the Humane Society because of lack of records, and it was just kind of a mess overall. And so eventually we were able to deal with that a little bit, but we didn't have the tools at the time that we would have liked to. Serious injury, so going back to the dangerous, that is an injury, that could cause death, disfigurement, impairment of bodily health, break or crush an arm, things like that. So anything requiring significant medical attention would also be classified as serious injury. So you can see this is different from what we can understand to be a dangerous dog versus a vicious dog. So the serious injury part is key to that. So initiating investigations. Our animal control officer, Chris, can see a dog that he observes to be potentially dangerous or vicious and initiate an investigation on his own. Any adult may request an investigation of a dog by writing a complaint to the Watertown Police Department. And then at any time during the investigation, if the person investigating, whether that be Chris or any other law enforcement officer, may seize the dog if he feels that there's a public safety risk. These are all things we've never had the ability to do before.
Beth, can I ask a question while it's fresh in my mind as I was going through this? At the point, Chris may impound it during the investigation. I'm assuming that investigation period also includes the potential appeal period, which you're going to be talking about later. In other words, while that finding is being appealed, that dog still remains impounded. Is that?
That is possible. If the appeal finds that there is no grounds to keep the dog, it would be released to the owner.
But during the appeal process, so
Right.
the dog would still be impounded.
Right. It would still remain
Okay.
whatever declaration that it was given, dangerous or vicious, until the conclusion of the investigation, the determination, and the hearing.
Okay. Is that understood in the language? Because as I read that, that question popped in my mind. I didn't know if we needed to clarify that or if it's understood just by the way it's written currently or by the way it's drafted currently. So I'm just posing that, food for thought as the board looks at this.
Yep, I see some nodding heads back here. So, that is kind of the purpose of why I did this, because it gives you an opportunity, ask some questions, and maybe have those resolved before we do a first reading. That was always my understanding, was that at any time during the investigation, if the dog has been seized or impounded, that is where the dog remains until the conclusion of the hearing. Is that what you guys were pretty much under? Yeah, got a lot of head nodding back there. Okay. So, dangerous or vicious. Now, throughout this investigation, there's going to be a determination made whether the dog is vicious or not, or dangerous or not, and it will simply be released to its owner. In the meantime, it may be impounded or probably will be impounded at the Humane Society. The dog is dangerous, and the owner will have to comply with requirements for keeping dangerous dogs, which we'll go through briefly later. And then if they find the dog is vicious, they may order the dog humanely euthanized. Now, that doesn't mean that the dog will immediately be walked down to wherever it needs to go to be euthanized. This is where the process comes in, where people have remedy. So anyway, there is, I think I probably should just move on here. Okay, so we've got this vicious or dangerous declaration. The animal control officer notifies the owner of the dog's designation, and this will be done in writing. I'm just kind of paraphrasing for you here. And the city attorney and the assistant chief of police will also be notified of any dog that has been designated as dangerous or vicious. Again, this is something that we need to do. Sometimes it got done, sometimes it didn't. We're making it part of the process so that any legal issues that may be arising from it, Matt's aware of, and the law enforcement end of it, you know, Assistant Chief Toomey or Chris, any of those people are aware of it. Now, at this point, after being notified of the finding, the owner may request in writing a hearing to contest that finding or designation. So they've written, we decide to have a hearing because he disagrees with our declaration. So we will hold a hearing after receiving that owner's written request. Now, I didn't put all the little detail in here, but we have some timelines on ourselves where we don't just let that linger and wait around. We will hold that hearing within 10 days. So it's not something that we will leave the owner hanging out there. And I think that that's really important for people to know, because, you know, there is a timeline of, you know, when can the person appeal? When can the hearing be held? That type of thing. And those are all clearly defined in the ordinance itself. So if you're reading it, that's, you know, where you'll find those numbers. Okay, at the hearing, we will give anybody there, whether it's somebody who wants to speak against the dog or on behalf of the dog, just kind of like our, you know, ordinances, they will have the opportunity to address these things. How was it provoked? Was there a severity, previous aggressive history? You know, what were the circumstances of the incident? So anybody is allowed to come to this hearing. It's an open meeting, of course, just like any other city meeting. And so it would be something that would be held for the Animal Control Board to make its decision. Okay. So a determination is made. The animal is, let's see, where we go. If the dog is dangerous, subject to the provisions of keeping a dangerous dog. If the dog is vicious, it shall result in humane euthanization. If the owner fails to request a hearing, the animal control officer's determination shall be final. This is where they can go if they don't like what we say, okay? The Animal Control Board says dog is dangerous or vicious, conducted the hearing, heard all of the evidence. Within 10 business days, the owner also can appeal to the Circuit Court, Third Judicial Court, for any remedies that may still be available.
Beth,
Yeah.
right here.
Oh,
Over
Matt.
Sorry. I just want to point out that the complainant, the original complainant, also has the ability to appeal as it's currently written. So if I'm the one that reported a dog that I believe to be dangerous, and I disagree with the animal control officer's finding, I also have the ability to appeal that decision.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that's basically what this is saying, you know, I don't agree with the board. I don't agree with anything that's happened. So going higher up in the food chain. So again, I want to stress that we've made sure that there are remedies for people and their dogs. All right. So this is a kind of an interesting part we've never had before either. In the past, a dog who bit or was vicious or created an injury, period. That was it. They were judged based upon their actions. So we thought, well, wait a minute. What if a dog is just being a dog? So if that damage is inflicted on a person who was in that person's home committing a crime or a willful trespass, and the dog is just being a dog, the dog will not have a designation of dangerous or vicious. Same thing about a dog that has been, a person that has been constantly provoking, tormenting, physical abusing on the animal, but is also shown to have repeatedly done so in the past. Again, the human got off, the dog suffered. You know, this is the problem in, you know, it's always the dog. We're always looking at the wrong end of the leash, as it were. If the dog was responding to pain or injury, it was protecting itself, its kennel, maybe a litter of puppies, a child, a person, owner's property. Again, if somebody's there that's not supposed to be there, the dog is okay. And the Animal Control Board also has the opportunity to determine that the dog is not a threat to the community. So any questions or anything on that? That was really important. This has never really been in our ordinance before either. So we wanted to make sure that this is what dogs do. You know, they protect their people. You read about it all the time. Dog protects baby from a snake, those kinds of things. So here we go. If your dog is declared vicious, it is unlawful to possess it in the city limits. It's a Class 2 misdemeanor. Then the dogs determined to be vicious, either by declaration or an unsuccessful appeal, shall be humanely euthanized unless the determination of the Animal Control Board is appealed to the South Dakota Circuit Court. And again, we're not immediately marching the dog down to be euthanized. We're waiting for the appeal process to go through its channels, right? Matt, nodding, good. I like when he nods. Okay, now.
Beth. Okay.
When you're sitting here, it sounds like it's coming from all over.
Just going back to that previous screen. So if a dog is, you guys determine that it's vicious, can they say, well, I'll just take it out to my cousin's farm?
As long as it's not within the city limits, I don't know that we have a lot of control over that, and it's really distasteful to me.
But they could.
Yeah, they could.
Yeah,
So
I mean, we don't have jurisdiction over anything outside of our borders, so.
So we could release a vicious dog.
and it has been done. We've besodden Brookings with several, I know, Brookings County Reed.
Councilwoman, just a question that occurred to my brain, and maybe you'll answer it later, but who pays for the euthanization?
The owner of the dog that's been declared vicious.
Okay,
They also pay for all of the impoundment fees or anything other fees accrued by that dog. So just because the dog is off the hook or the dog is going to be euthanized, that doesn't resolve the owner of any of the other fees. So the city isn't stuck with all the impounding fees and anything else that needs to be done. That's the responsibility of the owner. Got that right? Okay. Okay, so you can keep a dangerous dog. Remember, this is our current equivalent of a vicious dog, but there are conditions required. We felt that we needed to strengthen these requirements a little bit. So some of them are very similar and very familiar. A leash, not more than 4 feet in length whenever it's outside of an enclosure. A muzzle in a way that's humanely applied to keep it from biting animals or other humans. And then we have required insurance for liability, death, and bodily injury, property damage. There are, you can read in your copy of the ordinance amendments as to what the amounts are, but we felt this was really important because this is where situations have occurred where a person was injured by a dog and it was the person whose dog owned the dog had no money to help the person who was injured by their animal. So if they want to keep the dog, they are required to have insurance for those issues right there. So anyway.
Beth. Here. I just wanted to clarify the answer to your question, Councilman, why, if during the course of the investigation the dog's impounded and it's determined to be vicious and they exhaust their appeal processes, I don't think it'd be our intention to release that dog if somebody says, hey, I'm going to go out to my cousin's farm. I think our intention would be to euthanize that animal. Now, if the investigation proceeded without the dog being retained at the Humane Society and it was determined to be vicious and they up and move to Minneapolis and they're in the process, I mean, at that point, there's probably nothing we can do about that animal. But I don't think we would release it on somebody promising us to take it out to their cousin's farm, because I feel like, didn't that happen once?
Several times, and
Okay.
they were also brought it back to the city limits, trying to insist it was a different dog. Well, I'm sorry, but I've been around long enough to know what a different dog is. You could even paint its eye like, but anyway, so the insurance there, again, protects the person who is injured by the dog. Again, we've never had that. We've never had that before either. And so people ended up with lawsuits and lots of things that probably caused additional stress to the person who was injured. Okay. So notification, if the dog escapes from that enclosure or wherever they are, or if they bite or attack a person, domestic animal, or livestock, this dangerous dog must be immediately reported to the police department. If not, there are going to be a whole bunch of serious problems going down the line. It's a Class 2 misdemeanor, actually, again, to failure to comply. So any owner of a dangerous dog has to comply to these requirements. If he does not, and there are more citations issued, the dog will be seized and euthanized. So it's kind of on you. Dangerous dog, you have to be very vigilant. I'm going to make a personal political statement right now and say that there are so many good dogs out there, and there's so many dogs at the Humane Society that would love to have a home. Sometimes it baffles me that people will work so hard to keep one that's so dangerous, and that's just my own personal opinion. But I know dogs are much part of our families, so I think that is a decision, but we wanted to make sure all those things were addressed. Okay, so we beefed up a little bit the requirements of a confined area. A chain link fence is not going to do it. Cement block will. You can't have something that people can stick their hands in, crawl over, little kids can get in. So it has to provide light, shelter, adequate exercise, all the things you would expect for a humane enclosure. The bottom has to be permanently attached to the sides, and it has to have a top, and then it has to be constructed of solid material and closed or locked in a manner that the animal cannot escape. Is there any questions about that? Okay. A dangerous dog shall not be kept on a porch, patio. Think about it, any part of a house where a dog can go straight through the screen window and escape. We do not want dogs being kept there. So dangerous dog found out on a porch will not, that's no good. And then in a house or structure where screen windows or doors are the only obstacle preventing the dog from escaping, that's not allowed as well. So, again, we never stated where the dog could be kept when it was in the house and not in its kennel. And we also did not have really specific rules about the enclosure. We did have, solid structure, some of those kind of things. But I don't know if we ever even had a top required, did we? We did. Okay, good. So we had a top required. So we basically there's also in there saying that you can also dig the sides down 1 foot into the ground, to make sure the dog can't dig out. Okay, here's where we were talking about change of ownership a little bit. If you have a dangerous dog and you sell or transfer the ownership, you must notify the police department and give the new name, address, and phone number for that owner. The person transferring ownership, so I have a dangerous dog, I decide to sell it to Matt, I give the police department his name, address, and phone number, and then I also give Matt the declaration that I've received classifying the dog as dangerous. Okay. The new owner shall furnish written acknowledgement upon request of that, receiving that notice to the police department. Now, all of the things we talked about prior to this of owning a dangerous dog, the new owner must have those things, particularly the enclosure, prior to acquiring that dog or bringing it home. So they can't bring it home, stick it on the porch or wherever in the garage, and just wait, because we need them to have those things in place. They also will be required to comply with all the other conditions. If you have any questions about that, let me know. It's a little bit more complicated in the ordinance itself, but again, this is an opportunity to just give you some brief overview, some of the things we felt were needed to be pointed out. Okay, now Here's another one. A dog that has been declared dangerous will remain so for life. Because you have to remember, a vicious dog that's exhausted all of its appeals or has been declared vicious has been destroyed, humanely destroyed, and is not allowed to be owned. So, dangerous for life. Now, if the owner of the dangerous dog has had it for 3 years and that owner has received no additional violations in regards to that dog, after that 3 years, the owner can petition the Animal Control Board for a hearing to remove that dangerous declaration. And so they will review the dog, the behavior, the last 3 years, why the declaration was made in the first place, and if the dog is determined no longer dangerous, the designation will be removed. However, we can place conditions upon the removal of that designation. We can require the dog to be neutered, for example. We can require them to attend obedience classes. There are several options we have that we can tie in with the release of the dangerous designation, and failure to do so would put the dangerous declaration back on. So I think that, again, we're giving people opportunity to say, my dog's been a really good dog for 3 years and things have gone really well and I've trained it and things like that. They have a right and should have an opportunity to have us look at that. Now, we're looking at an ordinance that has yet to be codified, so anything that's going on right now can't be declared dangerous or vicious before this is codified, but all of this activity can be considered during a current investigation. Does that make sense? Okay, all right, okay. Did you want to come up and okay, good. All right, so here we are. Effective ordinance create safer community for both people and pets. And these are some of my favorite pictures, and this is good. People understand where they are. People don't have to be afraid of a vicious dog attacking their children. People understand that, as you can see in each of those pictures, dog is family. So what's next for us? Well, we're looking at drafting a reckless owner ordinance amendment, which is something that we've talked about in conjunction with this ordinance. And this is a dog that has multiple declarations of being a reckless owner. They've kept dogs. I mean, Matt can probably explain a little bit better what a reckless owner is. I have notes here, and I can't read my notes. But anyway,
What it might look like?
Well, what might be a definition for those of the people here to understand what a reckless owner may be?
That would certainly be up to the group to come up with the definition, but I suppose somebody that, if there's multiple complaints against an animal owner or something like that, but it would be a definition that we would be free to come up with as a community.
Right. And it is something that many other communities have enacted. The Municipal Law Journal recommends a reckless owner ordinance, so we think that's something we might want to do going down. How many is too many? We've talked at many times about adult animals per household or residence, and right now we have code that says no person shall keep any animals on a lot. I think Mark and I tried to do this once before, and this is what we ended up with in 2008 or something. No person shall keep any animals on any lot on a scale or basis creating a nuisance. How much subjective, wide open for interpretation is that? So we need to sit down and talk about a realistic number of dogs, adult dogs, so we're not talking about puppies or a litter of puppies, per household or resident. And it's an interesting fact that a commercial kennel is designated so after 3 dogs. So we have a kennel designated after 3 dogs, but we have no limit on the number of dogs a person can have in their household or residence unless they start barking or creating a nuisance or running into other people's yards. But that may not happen. So we just need to take a look at that. I think that's something that's been coming up more and more. Okay, defining some standards of care, cruelty, and neglect. By the way, all three of those pictures were taken in Watertown. Mark and I did a thing about chained dogs several years ago, and this is, because you can take a picture if you're standing on the sidewalk and not trespassing, right, Tim? So they're even worse. I just put those up there. But right now, again, the only definition we have right now is no person shall willfully or negligently maltreat or abuse or neglect in a cruel or inhumane manner any animal or fowl. That's it. There's nothing about neglect, those kinds of things. The state has gone one step further and added some more language in terms of maliciously and prolonged pain and physical injury and some of those kind of things. So I'd like to see our laws straightened, and I think the rest of them would like to see that as well, strengthened in that area. We have nothing about neglect, and a neglected dog is one that's not been fed or watered. Right now, if a dog can lay under a pickup truck during the day, that's considered shelter, okay? And you have to realize that any of those dogs tied up could have food and water put out before the owner leaves in the morning. They could tip both of them over and then they'd be done for the rest of the day in terms of having access to water. So we need to actually add some things about care, food, water, veterinary care, shelter, socialization, things like that. Any questions so far about where we're heading in the next direction? I don't want to confuse you with all that, but there we go. Any questions? And I know Mark wants to say a word or two.
Go ahead, Glenn.
I've got a question. I'm not sure who to address it to. I sat in on some of your meetings early on when you started this process, and one meeting in particular really struck home, I think, with all of us that were there. Pictures that we were seeing of children that had been bitten by dogs. And what was disturbing about, well, obviously the pictures, the incidents itself were disturbing. What was also disturbing is that there was never reported anywhere. And I know you had spent some time as a board talking about that as far as what kind of reporting process we have, or what kind of, how do we monitor when something like this does happen? Because in this particular case, these pictures were a result of a lawsuit that was being brought against a dog owner. Otherwise, you as a board weren't even aware of this happening. Can you address or make a comment about that, what process we have, or what can we do to strengthen that process to make sure that when something does happen, it does get reported to the proper channels?
Yeah, I was going to say.
Thanks for the question. We have improved our record keeping. Now we have in our record management system, we could flag any dog that's declared dangerous or vicious. So if we're responding to an address, there's going to be a flag that comes up saying, warning, dangerous dog on premise. Or, so we'll know that there's previous reports. I think the one you were talking about, it was at a second bite that happened. I think they were both reported. Same dog, same child, or second child? Second child, same dog. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what's spurred this on, is that we don't want that to happen again. We don't want to have that ability. So we're going to have records of if a dog's, go ahead.
But let's say that it happens within a family or a close friend. Nothing is ever brought to your attention. But let's say the child, for example, is taken to the hospital for care. Yep. Is the hospital then required to report that to the police department?
Yes, sir. Any hospital, any clinic are required if they have any kind of animal bite, whether it's a cat, dog, or anything like that.
And I think, and to echo that, the reports to the police department and all the other things we went through there, we have also tightened up and found the gaps or whatever you may want to find in that communication from the hospital, things like that, because a hospital, a veterinarian, a physician, a clinic, they all have to report those dog injuries. And the police department right now is doing an excellent job of writing up all of the incidences, no matter how minor or severe, so that there's a paper trail on that dog, and they're doing an excellent job of that. And sometimes it results in a hearing, and sometimes it sticks, So I think this was part of the process, as you said, that everybody's been working hard to make sure those loopholes are closed. I think the police department has put into place some excellent record keeping, and a lot of those slides where we talked about notifications and things like that, those were never there before, you know, and all of the file will be kept at the police department, the appeal requests, all those kind of things. So there's one place that it's all channeled through.
That's correct. And we also have tightened up our discretion on whether a dog should be left in the home or not. If it was a second bite or a severe bite to a child's face, it's automatic quarantine at the Humane Society.
Other quick.
Thank you. Question for both of you. Was there a penalty listed for animal cruelty or neglect?
As far as a fine or anything like that?
Or what, I mean, there was a Class 2 misdemeanor cited for failure to comply with the vicious or dangerous dog. Was there a penalty listed for animal cruelty or neglect, or did I miss it?
Typically, they wouldn't be prosecuted through the city. They would be prosecuted through the state because it's such a serious offense. It's we can only hold somebody accountable for the Class 2, obviously, so we would prosecute it through the state, so it's handled that way.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, but again, that was something that we wanted to be able to handle right here as a first line of defense, as it were, or something like that. And that's why they need to be strengthened because, you know, again, bottom of a pickup truck qualifies as shelter. I don't know, Chris, can you add any of the kind of things that you've seen for, am I covering it? Cruelty and neglect.
Can I add one item as well, over here? I gotta get a light or something. All of our ordinances have a punishment provision at the bottom. So if something is outlawed by ordinance, cruelty to animals is, we do have the ability to prosecute for that, but like AC Toomey mentioned, it's more than likely going to get prosecuted by the state.
Yeah, I just was curious of incidents that you've come across of which would possibly, the problem with it is willful and malicious. And so we've had situations where dogs have been shot. Was the one with the pizza and the dog getting shot? Do you remember that one? Anyway, we had a situation where bottom line was dog nipped at a person at a party, lots of illegal activities going on. The guy got out of the shotgun, put about 10 holes in his dog. All that he could be charged with was discharge of a firearm within the city limits because it wasn't willful or malicious. That was what it was determined. I know. So those things, we don't want those to happen anymore. Maybe give them a little overview. I just wanted to give Chris an opportunity, if we weren't covering all the situations that have arose, to add some insight into those. So I tried to move this along, so we had some. Jason.
Yeah, you said that during the investigation.
Microphone.
During the investigation, when the dog is impounded, if the dog is determined to be found to be a malicious dog, then the owner is responsible for all the fees. What if that dog is found not to be a vicious dog? Who pays for the fees then?
The owner still does. Because something occurred to initiate that investigation.
Okay.
Correct?
Councilman Vilhar?
I just like to make a comment, or a couple of comments actually. You started this process nearly 2 years ago, as I recall. I really want to thank the Animal Control Board, Chris, Tim, Matt. I mean, an awful lot of thought went into this. I think there was, when you undertook this project, you realize you're probably stirring a hornet's nest up because, like you said, Beth, the dogs are part of the family. But I really want to commend those involved in the process because very thoughtful, deliberate, the whole process done in an open setting if people want to sit in and weigh in. So I really want to commend you for the work that was done to bring it before us at this point. And also, as a dog owner, and how I got involved early on is we had a dog that was attacked by another dog a couple years ago. And as a result, our dog is blind in one eye. And I really want to chastise dog owners in general that do not that let their dogs run loose. It amazes me and frustrates me and angers me how often I see dogs running around the neighborhood totally loose and uncontrolled, and that just should not be. And we as dog owners, and I'm one of them, need to take more responsibility when it comes to controlling your animal.
We have penalties for dogs at large. That's one that's existed for a while. And if the dog then, in addition to at large, starts behaving viciously or dangerously in any fashion, then we can do that now that we have some of our new ordinances. Yes, just a couple days ago, I watched as a guy with 2 dogs stood at an intersection and was throwing tennis balls in both directions down the street. And he was so far away from where the dogs ended up with that tennis ball that there would have been no way he could have controlled any situation that occurred there. And a lot of people know that dogs get into that game, and if some little kid or another dog went after that tennis ball, there was nothing that he could do about it, and they would have had a dog fight or a dog attack. And so at large is really a big problem. I went out and stared at him until he stopped, took his dogs in the house. Then he got his pooper scooper and picked up poop in 2 yards. So anyway, I'm hoping that he does that no matter what, but it was a good stare down. And then he finally put them
Evil
away.
eye.
Oh, I just stand, you know. I may not, I am small, but I am mighty. Shakespeare said that.
Other questions or comments? I too would like to thank the Animal Control Board, and Beth, you introduced people when the microphone wasn't on them, so if you would please introduce them again with the microphone, that would be good.
Sure, I can do that. Well, Mark can introduce himself when he talks.
I'm Mark Reeb. I'm the veterinarian representative on the board.
Dan Miller, he is our Glacial Lakes Humane Society representative on the board. Chris DeWitt is our citizen at large. And speaking of that, we would like to expand our citizen at large members by at least 3 more. So if any of you know anybody who is really passionate about dogs and would really like to get involved in these type of, projects, we would really encourage them, or encourage you to encourage them to apply for the place on this board. Then we have Chris Christensen, our animal control officer. Behind him is the infamous, no, I'm just kidding, well-known Assistant Chief Tim Toomey. So that's who we brought today.
Thank you. I do have a form online, or you can call City Hall to apply to be on the Animal Control Board. And it will require a change to our ordinance, which Matt's working on. We'll get that soon. So thank you all for all your hard work putting this together. Dr. Reeb, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just had a few comments of maybe clarification. One, the statement about veterinarians reporting bite incidents, we don't have to do that. Now, if this was enacted, maybe that would be something that we would have to look at doing. Yeah. The other, with the cruelty, that's not involved in this one, Councilman Holeen. I mean, that's something that we were talking about tackling next, maybe would be to look at that ordinance and see what happens. And then also something for the city to consider too on this euthanasia. If the animal's abandoned, nobody's going to pay for that. Is there a contract that you're going to have to make with veterinarians that are going to provide that service, and who's going to provide those fees? As far as I know, there's no funds for that at this point. So if the owner doesn't pay for something like that going forward to get that service done, that's something they have to think about also.
What kind of a fee is it?
Well, it probably vary from veterinarian to veterinarian. I don't know if that, so that's going to.
$1,000 or less?
Yeah, I would assume.
I
I would think that would be something that could be contracted with. It's not going to come up very often. In
Sure.
fact, we did have one this year, though, and Chris went around to a number of veterinarians to try to have the service done. Well, one, you just show up with a dog that's supposed to be euthanized. Nobody was too gung-ho to do something like that without much documentation. So that's something to think about going forward too on that.
Right. Councilman Holeen?
Thank you, Mayor. Dr. Reeb, as long as you're up here, You mentioned that right now veterinarians don't have to report anything. Have you discussed, would you like, or would law enforcement like some sort of mandatory reporting procedure?
Well, we just discussed it back here. 'Cause I asked him how they did it with the hospitals and clinics, and it's just a policy thing. It's not by law or anything, so I think that's something that could be discussed and probably could be done, yeah.
All right.
Real quick, I'd like to jump in if I could voice a concern.
Hi, Mike.
Sure, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Voice in the box. It kind of got mentioned, but we might want to look a little more in depth at the component of if somebody puts a claim against you and the dog is deemed not dangerous, not vicious, about them still covering that cost out of pocket. Because maybe I'm just speaking as somebody who recently was at college. There's plenty of people out there that maybe get a little too antsy and jump the gun sometimes on what they deem a threat, and I could just see that getting abused a little bit, and I get just concerned. I don't know if we just need to put a little more stipulation to it or not, but it might be something to consider because there are plenty of crotchety people out there that love to overdo it a little bit.
Oh, I would agree. I'm going to try to address that for you, kind of with looking back and forth at the law enforcement who's here. I believe that the investigation that would be initiated, the dog is still probably with the owner, you know, if it's just a crotchety neighbor who says, well, that dog just looks at me funny every morning and I want an investigation, and they put it in writing. I think it won't take long to realize that that probably is the case. And then in that case, the dog would never probably reach impound. Correct. Okay, I got 2 law enforcement officers going correct. So that should help ease people's minds too if there's a neighbor dispute and things like that. So I agree with you that that needs to be taken into consideration. But I think we really have with the appeal or the investigative process, the appeal process, all those things. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I wish you were here so I could. But I know. Soon, I know.
All right, anything else? Well, thank you very much for all of your work. We
No
appreciate it.
It's a labor of love. Thanks, everybody. I hope this was helpful to you. I hope this was helpful, and all of us would be more than willing to answer any questions that you may have. Call us or email us or anything like that. Some of us have different expertise in different areas, so, you know, we would, law enforcement, contact law enforcement, dog behavior, me, Chris would be all the kind of investigative, Mark would be more of the Humane Society things. Not Humane Society, veterinarian. Dan would come with the perspective of how this would impact the Humane Society in terms of how many dogs get impounded and things like that. So there you go.
All right, thank you. All right, item number 6 is long-range transportation plan update, and I'll look for Heath to give that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wanted to bring this up briefly here this evening. As you recall, we were awarded a grant, 50% matching funds grant from the state with the DOT through one of their programs to accomplish a long-range transportation plan update for the city. Our last one, I believe, was formally done. It was a comprehensive update, was in 2005, so we were well overdue for an update. Where we're at in the process, the DOT has gotten a hold of me, and they want to establish what they call the Study Advisory Team, the SAT. And so I put together a tentative list, and I've already got some correspondence out to these folks to participate in the study on that advisory team. And that list so far includes myself, the assistant city engineer, the urban planner, the street superintendent, a member from city utilities, a member from First District, a member or representative from the county, a representative from Watertown Development Company, the mayor, and then the last piece of the puzzle was to plug in one of the council members, or 2 or however many you guys choose, actually. And that's really why I was going to bring it forward to you this evening. As far as the timeline goes, we're looking at soliciting consultants after we have a kickoff meeting. That kickoff meeting will probably happen here at the end of August, early September. And then once we start the solicitation process for the consultant, the notice to proceed would probably be given out by the end of October. And then the consultant would proceed from there with their studies for the transportation network throughout the city. We anticipate the final completion of the project probably late next year, November, December of 2020. As far as time commitments, you know, these initial meetings will be 1 or 2 of them at most through the selection process. And then from there on, kind of on an as-needed basis as the consultant progresses with the work, where we would get together as a advisory committee and discuss the progress and review some of their comments and add any input we might have.
Would the state, the local DOT provide a representative? Or, I mean, normally the state is obviously going to be involved in the process with us, but will they have someone local?
Yes, thank you for pointing that out, Mayor. I did not include them on my list because that was the one I was compiling, but you are correct. They had, I think, 2, maybe 3 representatives that they would have on this committee as well.
Okay, good. Are there any volunteers? Councilman Vilhauer.
You asked the wrong question.
If think about it a little bit, and if this is something you'd like to participate in, it's pretty interesting, and it's an important study that we'll rely on for years to come. And so let me know, and if I don't get any volunteers, I'll keep hounding you until someone gives in. Okay, Councilman Vilhauer.
I had a question for you, Heath. Can you clarify for us what streets or what are we looking at? I guess I'm referencing. I brought a specific example to you here a couple of months ago that relates to some of the side streets. What are we going to be looking at necessarily within the community as we go through this process?
So the entire street network is open game for this study, and they do analyze the entire street network from development standpoint, where we see concentrations of development throughout the community. Traffic and communication patterns are part of this process, where they actually doing what they call an origin destination study that our cell phones are a big part of these days, where they can actually track origin and destination for commuters throughout the community. And what that does is builds a network of traffic loading, traffic counts, anticipated growth in certain areas of town. Ultimately, from the last report, what we came out of that was with a strong list of suggested road improvements that were needed to expand the street network, so that you had some the appropriate arterial extensions or collector extensions that were needed to help continue to foster growth and development through the community. I think I noted in the grant application some of the changes that have occurred since 2005. Obviously, there's been numerous changes, but the growth at LATI, for example, the public school system, and how those locations have shifted since 2005, from the middle school being built way up in the north end of town, for example. So some of those things that they will look at and assess, they're all kind of fair game for the study like this, and really helps to prioritize the needs on our transportation network throughout the city.
Yeah, some of the obvious projects that we've done that were recommended by the older study from 2005 are the First Avenue North extension, which is Willow Creek Drive. That's takes a lot of traffic. The Southerly bypass was another one that was on that. And so what I'm hoping to see is something that's going to offset the inevitable growth around the Terex facility that's going to put a lot of strain on the freeway on-ramp and off-ramp and the traffic on Highway 212. We do have in that study a recommended another interchange on the freeway. And do you remember what the date is? I think they were projecting the need for that around now. So I expect this study will project that need and help to establish the need for it so that we can do that before it becomes a terrible problem. Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you, Heath. Is there any old business anyone wants to discuss? Any new business? Councilwoman Manti?
I'll probably repeat myself at the actual council meeting, but since this is safety and public works, I just wanted to take a moment to remind people about the 212 detours that are running through a lot of residential neighborhoods right now. We've had issues, and I've had issues particularly because the current detour runs through my ward, that cars are going in excess of 35 or 40 miles an hour. The police department has done a great job getting those cars slowed down, with the exception of somebody who owns a white Suburban that comes through at noon. But anyway, seriously, but they've been patrolling, they've been having places where they're sitting with the radar. But this is something that's going to be going on for a long time. Ours is not the only neighborhood it's going to go through. There will be other residential detours. All of these streets and all of these detours are 25 miles an hour. And not that long of a period of time, we're going to have children. Right now, the 4th Avenue section of the detour is all houses with children, almost all houses with children. So I just want to remind the public that as we're going through these detours and things like that, when you're in a residential area, don't forget it's 25. And according to engineering types, I believe that one of the things that contributes to that factor is there's no parking anymore, and it's been proven that the wider the street is, the faster people want to go. So don't go fast. That's kind of the message here. Thank you.
That is true. You're absolutely right. People go as fast as they feel safe traveling. So you can post away whatever speed limit you want. Largely, people are going to go the speed they feel comfortable traveling. So we need to pay attention to the posted speed limits. Is there any other new business? All right. I'm looking at the council. Do you want a break, or do we have time to go into like a 10-minute executive session? Otherwise, we can do it later. Okay, then we do have reason to go into executive session pursuant to SDCL 1-25-2 to consult with our legal counsel on contractual matters. And we do not expect to take any action when we come out. So I'll look for a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
I have a motion by Manti and a second by Holeen. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. We're in executive session.